What is going on, everybody? I'm coming at you with another deck profile video. Today's deck profile video is on the deck that I played in regionals, and I think it's probably one of my favorite decks to play because of how miserable it just makes your opponent. But before we hop into the deck profile, I just want to thank everyone for the support, and if you do enjoy the content, please make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Make sure that you ring that bell for notifications as I do post tons and tons of One Piece content. But without further ado, let's dive on in. So, to start off, we're playing the Magellan leader. His effect is pretty straightforward. Whenever you return a Dawn card to your Dawn deck on your turn, he gets 1000 DP, which means that he's really strong, swinging 6k most turns because a lot of your effects are at least Dawn -1, if not Dawn -2. Going forward, we're playing only 4 1 costs, and that is 4 Hannibal. He's going to search out your Sadie, your Koala, your Minotaur, as well as your Magellan and your Hell's Judgment. Other than that, we're not playing any other Impelled Down cards, and it's pretty straightforward. It also can swing at the other searchers in the game, so like that, he's basically a Nami for the deck. I'm playing 2 Shiki. He's a 2k counter, he's got trigger, and he's a decent play if you're going second. Other than that, that's all he really is there for. He doesn't do a ton, and the trigger never came up for me, but again, 2k counter, and again, he's a decent turn 1 play against certain decks if you're going second, like Zoro, so that's why I'm playing him. I'm playing 4 Little Sadie. Again, she's a 2k counter, which is fantastic, and being able to cheat out one of your Jailer Beasts on your second turn is super great because it can open up King plays, or it can just put a lot of pressure on your opponent's board and force them to deal with the cards that you're playing. So we love her. You don't always want to play her into a Jailer Beast. That's not always necessary. Sometimes it is better to keep that 2k in your hand. We're playing 4 Koala. Koala is super impactful as a 4-drop blocker who lets you ramp. He's super great because if you get him out against decks that want to swing at you early on your second turn and you block with him, it lets you ramp into a king really early. So I do love playing this card. We're playing 4 of the Minotaur. Minotaur is an awesome card because he has double attack just inherently, and when he is KO'd again, you do get the Dawn ramp. So this card puts a lot of pressure on your opponent. It makes them want to deal with him. It makes them want to kill him. And so if they do end up killing him, then that's it. That's all she did. That's all she got, and you get your Dawn and you ramp up. Or they don't deal with him instantly, and you just put so much pressure on the board, and you can just swing for double attack. I'm playing 4 Uda. Uda's really good against the aggro matchups because you can rest other characters when they're swinging at you, and you have so many tools to protect your characters in this game. Hell's Judgment is an absurd card, so her in combination with that just means that you can stop so many attacks, and then because of all the board advantage that you can generate with this deck, you can just pop all those characters, and then you just win the game. I'm playing 4 X-Drake, 2k counter, as well as having a pretty relevant on-play effect that does come in clutch super frequently. So I do love X-Drake. Pretty self-explanatory there. I'm playing 3 Douglas Bullet. This card is very important in the black matchup because he's what lets you get around the blockers. He's also important in the Zephyr matchup, which, I mean, late game is super relevant, but he lets you get around Borsalinos, and you love that. Borsalino is a card that can be super duper annoying, and Bullet just lets you kind of bypass that. So we're playing him for that effect. Also, he synergizes super well with our leader at Dawn -1, so you get to play him and then swing 6 with your leader, so that's awesome. I'm playing 4 Magellan. Magellan's a great card because he essentially is a static body, and if they ever kill him, he just ruins your opponent's game. So this is a card that I love just dropping back to back of. Putting your opponent back 2 Dawn is crazy, as well as the fact that he's swinging 6k every turn, and your opponent never really wants to kill him because it sets them back so far. And he synergizes so well with your leader because the turn that you play him, you get a 6k swing with your leader, you have him, you've minus a Dawn on your opponent, so you've de-ramped them, and then you have a body for next turn that your opponent doesn't want to deal with. So even though he doesn't have counter, it doesn't really matter because he's always going to be relevant in almost all matchups, except for maybe Zoro, because they're a bit too aggressive. But if you notice that Zoro isn't putting a ton of pressure on early, and you can get a Magellan out, they're never going to kill it, and you're always going to have that 6k swing on board. I'm playing 4 Queen because Queen is just amazing. She fits the exact kind of curve that we're looking for, which is mostly 5 costs, and her effect is really good with your leader because it lets you get another 6k swing in, as well as drawing 2 and trashing 1. I'm playing 3 of the 6-drop king, Dawn -1, pop of 4 cost or less, 7k DP. He's really great. I think he comes up pretty often. He's pretty good in the Whitebeard matchup because he could pop a ton of different cards, and like their 4-drop Frankies, the 4-drop Luffy, Zoro, Nami, pops a lot of different stuff. And so he's great there. I think he's a bit slow in the Zoro matchup, so that's why we are playing the 7-drop king, which pops like everything in Zoro except for Luffy, which neither the king doesn't pop either. So 7-drop king is super great. I love that card. Does a lot of work. It's also necessary against Law. If you don't see 7-drop king against Law, you probably just lose that matchup. It's probably the hardest matchup in the game. I'm playing 1 Blast Breath because there are a lot of turns where you're only going to have 1 Dawn active after you've made your play, so Blast Breath is great because it lets you protect your characters and your life. I also am playing 3 Thunder Bagua, self-explanatory card, 4k counter on a 2 cost, but it lets you ramp. The trigger effect is also pretty good. If you hit it in life early, it could be the difference between you playing a 7-drop king or a 6-drop king, which could change the momentum of the game. And then, of course, we're playing the best card in the deck, which is Hell's Judgment. This card lets you basically counter out of 2 attacks in the early game to mid game. Late game, it's not as great, but it still lets you counter out of at least 1 attack in combination with a counter. So that's all of our counter cards. I also want to talk a bit about matchups and what Magellan excels against. So Magellan is probably the best counter in the game to Whitebeard, and the variant of Whitebeard that we've been seeing with just the Strawbeard. This deck basically means that they can never play a Whitebeard if you see a Magellan on curve. I think that the games that Magellan loses to Whitebeard are because they never see their 5-drop Magellan. As someone who played against Whitebeard, I only lost my games to Whitebeard because I never saw my Magellan, and they were able to just go back-to-back Whitebeard. And this deck doesn't really have a way of dealing with that, but if you can stop a Whitebeard from ever coming out, they just cannot play the game, and you have so many tools to deal with their board and so many different blockers that if you can just stall out, they can never really play a Whitebeard by the time they get to it because they'll have no life left, and then it's just they don't have enough Dawn active because you've been chipping 6 at their life every single turn to deal with it. The Zoro matchup is also fairly decent for Magellan because you have so many blockers like Uda and Queen. Queen is naturally good because Zoro wants to do a lot of 5k swings, and she's a 6k blocker, as well as you play cards like Hell's Judgment, which could basically just stop 2 attacks from a Zoro player, and 7-drop King, who just pop things. And that also goes to the fact that we're playing a ton of 2k counters in Sadie, Shiki, X-Drake, as well as Thunder Bagua and Blast Breath, and we also have a lot of Searchers. And we can drop a lot of bodies on board pretty quickly, like Sadie and Koala, and now you have 2 bodies on board that can retaliate to Zoro when they may not be able to play as many bodies, or to match the amount of bodies that they've played. This matchup is also extremely good into blue, because again, stalling out your opponent, stopping them from being able to play things like their Ivankovs and their Doflamingos and their Mihawks is pretty rough. Again, you definitely need to see your curve against decks like Ivankov, otherwise they can just run away with the game. But if you can stop them from getting to their 7 Dawn turn, then they really cannot play the game, and you love to see that. You love to stop them from getting there, and being able to force them to 6 Dawn to awkward Dawns and forcing them to deal with your Magellan means that they're never going to be able to establish enough board, and due to the fact that Ivankov wants to play with little cards in hand, it's just gravy for you. Into Kinemon, it matches up okay. The Kinemon matchup, I think, is fairly back and forth. You do have a tough time dealing with Odin because he's such a big threat, and you're basically going to have to let a lot of your blockers die while attempting to just, kind of go aggressive. You do have a ton of blockers that get rested, but you do have ways to pop a lot of characters on board. Just the only card that you have a tough time dealing with is Odin. So if you can find a way to put enough pressure on your opponent before they can get to Odin, either by Dawn minusing or by destroying all the cards that they play. Like if you get to 7 Dawn and they have like Kiku out and a blocker and you can pop both of those, that feels really good for you. However, Kiku can rest all of your blockers, and though Hell's Judgment is a fantastic tool against them, it can maybe set you far enough behind that you cannot recover in that matchup. However, you can stall out a lot with the Queen and Hell's Judgment combo. I played a game in regionals against an Odin, and they had 2 Odins out, and because of Hell's Judgment, it meant that I could block all of their swings, and unless they want to commit more than 6 Dawn to restanding their Odins, it really was just free for my Queens. The matchup into Smoker really relies on Douglas Bullet. You can stall them off of their Kuzan and their Sakazukis, and then force them to pop your Magellans with their Sakazukis, because if they do, they just lose the game, because they're never going to get to the 10-drop Kuzan. They're never going to be able to play into the bodies that are impactful, and your Douglas Bullet lets you rest all of their Borsalinos. You don't really care about your characters dying if you're playing Magellan, but you care if you're losing your Kings. So in that matchup, you want to use your Kings to pop the smaller characters as well as the 4-drop Kuzan, and Magellan is just there to stall your opponent out. Against Zephyr, this is a very one-sided matchup for Magellan. Magellan just stops them from getting to Kuzan, which is the entire point of the Z deck, and then God forbid they ever get to Kuzan, they just pop your Magellan and send themselves back to 2 Dawn. I had a game against a Zephyr player where I had 2 Magellans out, and he had to destroy both of them to avoid lethal, and he went back to 2 Dawn, and then at that point he just could not play the game anymore. Even with a 10 drop out, it meant that the next turn he had 4 Dawn, and so he could use his leader effect one more time, but then he just couldn't use it again, and he was too far behind at that point, so I just ended up taking it. Against decks like Kid, against decks that want to get to these high-end characters, this deck is fantastic if you could stall them out, but again, a lot of these matchups rely on seeing a Magellan. I think most situations you want to mulligan for it, except for in the Law matchup and the Zoro matchup. Law is the single-handed worst matchup for this because of all the attacks it can get in, and you don't have a reliable way to destroy their board other than your 7-drop King. So just make sure that if you are playing into Law, you see 7-drop King, otherwise you might as well scoop because the matchup is super duper hard. Anyways, I hope you all like my deck profile for Magellan. I have a ton of fun playing this deck, and until next time, Monty out.